around, and we've identified and we argue that ethical dilemmas in fundraising occur when there is tension between what donors want fundraisers to do and what beneficiaries need fundraisers to do. Because donors and beneficiaries both have certain rights, and therefore fundraisers have duties to them. And sometimes those duties come into conflict. So what we are saying is that fundraising is ethical when it balances the duty of fundraisers to ask for support with the rights of the public not to be put under undue pressure to give, and unethical when it doesn't. And you can pick up copies of our report from our stand in the marketplace. Now, when we launched this, we did it as a balancing act only between donors and beneficiaries. But really, and it was always intended to apply to any stakeholder groups that fundraisers work with. So it's about balancing your duties to donors with your also duties to the media, to other fundraisers, to regulators, and to the people that work at your organisation as well. So this looks like you've actually got a balancing act between the interests and the needs of fundraisers and the interests and the needs of programme delivery staff. So we've got to say, is it possible, can we apply this kind of rights balancing ethics to actually the framing debate? Now, the first thing we have to notice about this polarised debate and the way it is framed is that from an ethical perspective, from looking at it from a philosophical perspective, there's an asymmetry in that. It's actually not presented as an ethical dilemma. So an ethical dilemma is when you've got two good right courses of action, both of which have potentially negative outcomes. This is presented actually as a moral temptation. So from the value side frame, from the programme delivery side of this, what it says is that maintaining beneficiary dignity and challenging stereotypes is the right thing to do. But what it then says is that the fundraising frame of using shock or stark or graphic images is actually wrong. So you've got a conflict here between right and wrong, and it's little wonder that we have little consensus in bringing those together, because why would people who believe they are absolutely right compromise to the views of people they think are absolutely wrong? So if we want to move forward, we actually need to reframe the question to make it not a moral temptation, but an ethical dilemma. So this is how we present it as an ethical dilemma. So from the programme delivery value side of this, what we are saying is that if you using images that maintain dignity and challenge stereotypes has a moral outcome. That's a moral outcome in its own right, but it has potentially negative, unethical outcomes of raising less money to fund beneficiary services. For the fundraising frame, that actually has the moral outcome of actually raising more money, because fundraising and raising money is an ethical act in and of itself. That is something that the values frame tends to deny to fundraising, that what you're doing is unethical the way that you do it, but it's ethical. But it has potentially bad outcomes in the images that you use and the potential effect that has on challenging stereotypes, maintaining dignity, etc. So what we actually need to be able to do is to move this around to ask different questions. So once we frame it this way, we can actually ask questions that we would not have asked before and arrive at maybe decisions that we wouldn't have asked before. And one of the questions that we would never have considered previously asking is this: is this ethical? To deliberately, or maybe knowingly will be a better word, use images in marketing that you can reasonably expect will result in under-resourced and underfunded services for beneficiaries. That's a question that doesn't really get asked in this debate until now, because it's not the way that people are thinking about it. So if we're going to move forward, we need to kind of reframe this a little bit. So, who, however, is actually going to ask those questions and make those decisions? So we can clearly see that there are two duties. There are duties to raise money and to use a positive frame or present people in a particular way. Reframing the question like this actually lets us see that it isn't really a conflict between fundraising interests and service delivery interests. This is really a conflict between two separate duties that charities have to their beneficiaries. It's just actually represented that one arm of an NGO takes one side, or one arm of an NGO takes the other side. It's fundraising that takes raising money, but actually, who sets the target? Who ensures these are actually fulfilled? So when we talk about exercising those duties, fundraisers clearly have responsibility for the first one of those. They're given targets, usually short-term under-resourced targets, but they are given targets nonetheless, and they know how and when they've reached them. How, however, does the charity measure its protection of of beneficiary dignity? How does it measure the change of public perception and reducing stereotypes and changing attitudes? Notwithstanding, is it even within the charity's purpose to actually do this kind of thing? Could it actually legally spend its donors' money on doing these kind of things if this isn't how it's constituted and set up to do? So what we tend to find is that while the charity sets itself these kind of aspirational ideas for using challenging public stereotypes in the values frame, nobody takes responsibility for actually achieving it. It's relied on the fundraisers to meet their actual targets while somehow meeting these targets, and no one's ever given them any targets or any actual targets around. So what we have to realise here, that this is a duty that a charity owes in toto. So we need to shift this debate to the people that can make those kinds of strategic decisions. This is something that exists beyond fundraisers' pay grade and beyond the pay grade of programme delivery staff. This is something that has to be kicked upstairs to the board, to the trustees, to the senior management team. Now, having done that, they may decide that they want to set some targets around using a positive frame. They may want to do some market research in attitudes of public now and decide that they are going to use images with a target of changing public perception by measuring it for some time down the line. What they then may have to accept that will result in a reduced income generation target because of the images they are using. But that is fine, because that will be what the charity has decided are its strategic and charitable priorities. And then fundraisers know what their targets are on both domains. So the question, of course, then is how do we kick that upstairs? And there's a barrier. So if there is an ideological divide in the charity sector, it's this. It's the spectre, once again, of fundraisers being a necessary evil. This is DC Comics, these are the supervillains. So we've got the Joker, Catwoman, Lex Luthor, and I think that's Sinestro. The idea of them being necessary evil here is that you can't have people doing good and being heroes if they've got villains, unless they have villains to fight against. The idea, of course, in fundraising is that charities have to do good, but we have to do some bad to get that. Now, this whole thing here is, the framing debate, again, is just a microcosm of the whole debate, of the whole question of how we integrate fundraising into the rest of the organisation and get them to believe it. So the mission is the money, everyone is a fundraiser, this is all about delivering the mission through raising the money. Once we do that, this whole framing question just disappears because everybody is bought into how do we balance those things. That's a question I can't really answer now. But at the moment, I think what we have is that the people that adhere to the values frame are actually absolving themselves of responsibility to work out and deliver the income generation targets and how the charity does that, while granting themselves the privilege of criticising those that do. So it's a classic case of power without responsibility. And so there's a spelling mistake on here. It wouldn't be one of my presentations without at least one spelling mistake. But this is where we are at the moment. We are down here in this supposed ideological divide, but we're really in an ideological rut. What we just have, we have programme delivery staff yelling at fundraisers, you are wrong, and we have fundraisers just saying, no, we're not, which sounds like a case of special pleading. Which is why Jess's research is so important, because instead of just saying it raises more money, it actually undercuts one of the values frame's arguments that the beneficiaries think this is a lack of dignity. The best argument against that, or to change perception, is what do beneficiaries actually think of themselves. And what we need to do is to get rid of that ideological noise and clutter and move it up there to a new decision-making frame. But to do that, we need to bring in some new thinking. Unless we change the frame of the questions we are asking, and this conference is all about asking the right questions, we really are not going to get people to even think about it differently. If they don't think about it differently, they won't think there's a need for a separate answer. So I want to finish with, actually, can we have the next video, please?